At the Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary, miracles don't just happen, they're made. When two tiny lion cubs, abandoned by their injured mother, faced certain death, their only hope came from an unlikely savior. Gerda, a bobcat still grieving her own lost litter. Against all odds, a bond formed, crossing species, defying nature, and changing everything the sanctuary thought they knew about family. But 2 years later, as the cubs grew into powerful lions, everyone held their breath. Could the bond forged in tenderness survive the instincts of the wild? This is a story of remarkable courage, unexpected kinship, and a reunion so astonishing it must be seen to be believed. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories.
The first light of dawn crept across the dusty plains of the Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary in northern Arizona. Dew clung to the sparse vegetation surrounding the expansive grounds, where the soft growls and calls of rescued animals welcomed the new day. For Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, the sanctuary's founder and lead veterinarian, mornings like these usually brought a sense of peace, a moment of calm before the demanding day began. But this particular morning in late March was different. Eleanor's weathered hands gripped her coffee mug tightly as she stared through the observation window at Kiera, a 6-year-old African lioness rescued 18 months earlier from poachers near the Arizona-Mexico border. The majestic feline had given birth to 2 cubs just 3 days ago, a miracle in itself considering the extensive injuries she'd sustained from a poacher's trap before Border Patrol agents discovered her. "Any change?" asked Tom Whitehorse, the sanctuary's senior animal keeper. His silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and deep lines etched his face from decades working in wildlife rehabilitation. Eleanor shook her head, her 63-year-old frame sagging slightly with the weight of concern. "Nothing. She's completely ignoring them." Inside the enclosure, Kiera lounged in the far corner, her golden eyes half closed, seemingly oblivious to the 2 tiny forms huddled together in the straw bedding Eleanor and her team had prepared for the birthing. The cubs, 1 male, 1 female, were alarmingly still, their once pitiful mewling now faded to occasional whimpers. "It's been 3 days, Tom," Eleanor said, running a hand through her silver-streaked auburn hair. "I've seen reluctant mothers before, but this is—" She trailed off, watching as Kiera stretched indifferently. Tom nodded, his Native American heritage giving him a particular reverence for the relationship between mother and child, even in the animal kingdom. The trauma she endured might have damaged more than just her body. "I wanted to give her every chance," Eleanor said. "But we can't wait any longer. Those cubs won't survive another day without intervention." Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You made the right call giving her time. Now we make the right call saving those cubs." Within the hour, the sanctuary's rescue team carefully extracted the weakened lion cubs while Kiera watched from her corner, showing neither aggression nor interest, a disturbing apathy that broke Eleanor's heart more than any display of aggression would have. The sanctuary's medical building became a flurry of activity as Eleanor and her team worked to stabilize the dehydrated cubs. Sarah Chun, the sanctuary's newest veterinarian at 32, carefully inserted tiny 4 lines while Eleanor prepared a specialized formula. "Their body temperatures are dangerously low," Sarah reported, her delicate hands working with practiced precision despite the pressure. "The little male is in worse shape." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of her 40 years of wildlife veterinary experience pressing down on her. "Let's get them warmed up slowly." Heat pads at 101 degrees. As the day progressed, the team took shifts bottle feeding the cubs every 2 hours. By nightfall, both showed marginal improvement, though Eleanor knew they weren't out of danger yet. "What are we calling them?" asked Mia Johnson, a 28-year-old intern with bright eyes and boundless enthusiasm despite the sobering situation. Eleanor hadn't considered names yet, a defense mechanism from years of losing animals despite her best efforts. "Let's focus on keeping them alive first," she said gently. "They need more than just food and warmth," Tom said as he entered the room for the night shift, his voice low and gravelly. "Cubs need socialization, grooming, stimulation." "I know," Eleanor sighed. "Bottle raising is a last resort. Without proper maternal care." The unspoken reality hung in the air. Hand-raised big cats often develop behavioral issues, making rehabilitation to the wild impossible and even sanctuary life challenging. "What about a surrogate?" Sarah suggested, adjusting the tiny female cub's position to help her digest the formula. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "We don't have any other lactating lions." "Not necessarily a lion," Sarah continued, her eyes brightening. "I read about cross-species fostering at the Johannesburg Wildlife Center. Sometimes the maternal instinct transcends species." Tom's interest was piqued. "We have Gerda." A long silence followed as Eleanor considered the suggestion. Gerda was an 8-year-old bobcat who had arrived at the sanctuary just 2 months earlier after being struck by a vehicle on Highway 89. Her injuries had healed well, but the trauma had left her unusually docile for a bobcat. More significantly, the veterinary examination upon her arrival had revealed evidence of a recent pregnancy, though no kids were found near the accident site. "A bobcat raising lion cubs?" Eleanor finally said, skepticism evident in her tone. "The size difference alone. Indigenous cultures have stories of wolves raising human children, bears adopting fawns," Tom said, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality it often did when he shared the wisdom of his Navajo ancestors. "Nature finds a way when compassion opens the door." Eleanor looked at the tiny cubs, their golden fur still patchy and their eyes firmly closed. They were fighting for every breath. "What choice did they have?" "It's worth a try," she conceded. "But we'll need to proceed with extreme caution." The next morning brought a flurry of preparations. Gerda's enclosure, a spacious area designed to accommodate her recovery, was modified to create a safe space for potential fostering. The team constructed a small den area with narrow access that would allow the bobcat to enter, but would be secure enough to protect the cubs if Gerda rejected them. "We'll need to monitor them constantly," Eleanor instructed as she checked the cubs' vital signs. Their condition had stabilized overnight, but they remained dangerously weak. "At the first sign of aggression, we pull them out." Tom nodded, setting up surveillance cameras that would allow them to observe the interaction without human presence disturbing the delicate process. Sarah prepared a mild sedative for Gerda, just enough to keep her calm during the initial introduction without compromising her instincts. "Do you really think this could work?" she asked Eleanor, uncertainty clouding her features. "I've been doing this work for 40 years, Eleanor replied, drawing the medication into a syringe, "and nature still surprises me every day." With Gerda lightly sedated, Eleanor and Tom carefully placed the lion cubs in the prepared den. The tiny creatures huddled together, their golden forms dwarfed by even the modest space. "Now we wait," Eleanor said as they retreated to the observation room. For 3 tense hours, Gerda remained in her favorite corner of the enclosure, occasionally glancing toward the new addition with mild curiosity, but making no move to investigate. The cubs, weak as they were, occasionally released pitiful mewls that echoed through the monitoring speakers. "Maybe we should try something else," Sarah suggested as afternoon crept toward evening. "Give her time," Tom advised. "The sedative is still wearing off. She needs to make this choice on her own." As if hearing his words, Gerda finally stood, stretched, and began a cautious approach toward the den. The team held their collective breath as the bobcat's compact form moved with deliberate slowness. Gerda paused at the entrance, her nose twitching as she detected the unfamiliar scent. She let out a low growl that made Eleanor's hand hover over the emergency response button. "Wait," Tom whispered. The bobcat lowered her head, peering into the den. The female cub emitted a weak cry, a sound that seemed to trigger something primal in Gerda. Her posture shifted subtly, ears perking forward instead of flattening in aggression. With careful movements, Gerda entered the den. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide as they all watched the monitors intently. Inside the den, Gerda circled the cubs once, twice, before lowering herself beside them. For a moment, she simply lay there, her spotted coat a stark contrast to the tawny fur of the lion cubs. Then, to the astonishment of the watching humans, she began to groom the male cub with gentle licks. Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. In 40 years of wildlife work, she had witnessed countless wonders, but this moment, this unlikely connection, struck her with its raw beauty. "Tom," she whispered, "you were right." The burly man simply nodded, his own eyes suspiciously moist. Over the next days, Gerda's maternal instincts bloomed fully. She groomed the cubs diligently, stimulating their circulation and keeping them clean. She curled around them at night, her body heat providing the warmth they desperately needed. Most surprisingly, she actually began to nurse them, though Eleanor ensured the cubs still received supplemental bottle feedings to compensate for the difference in milk composition and volume. "We should name them now," Mia suggested a week later, as they all watched the cubs, noticeably stronger, tumbling over Gerda's patient form. Eleanor, who had scarcely left the sanctuary in the past 10 days, found herself smiling. "You're right. They've earned their names." After some discussion, they settled on Leo for the male cub, a nod to his species, and Nala for the female, after a character from a popular lion-themed movie that Mia insisted was perfect. "And they've earned their place in the record books too," Sarah added, lowering her phone. "I've been consulting with colleagues across the country. No one has documented a successful cross-fostering between a bobcat and lion cubs before. Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Eleanor cautioned. "They're still fragile. We have a long road ahead." But as the weeks turned to months, Leo and Nala not only survived but thrived under Gerda's attentive care. The bobcat seemed to adapt her parenting to accommodate her adoptive offspring's larger size and different developmental pace. When they grew too large for her to groom effectively, she focused on their faces and ears. When they became too heavy for her to move by the scruff, she nudged and guided them with her paws instead. By the cubs' 4th month, they had outgrown their foster mother in size, yet the bond between them remained undiminished. Gerda would play with them in the expanded enclosure the sanctuary had prepared, teaching them stalking techniques despite the lion's less stealthy approach to hunting. The story of the bobcat mother and her lion cubs spread, first locally through visitors to the sanctuary, then regionally as a Phoenix news station did a feature, and finally nationally when a major nature documentary series began filming their unique family. "Doesn't all the attention worry you?" asked Dr. Marcus Reed, a renowned big cat specialist who had traveled from the University of Texas to observe the unusual family. He and Eleanor stood watching as Gerda demonstrated pouncing techniques to the now gangly cubs. "Of course it does," Eleanor admitted. "But we need the funding the publicity brings. And there's an educational value to their story." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "The real question is what happens next. They're developing well physically, but what about their species-specific behaviors? They're learning to hunt like bobcats, not lions." It was a concern that had kept Eleanor awake many nights. Lions were social cats with complex pride behaviors. Bobcats were solitary and territorial. How would this unusual upbringing affect Leo and Nala's development? "We're supplementing with videos of lion behavior," Eleanor explained. "And we plan to introduce them to our other lions, at a safe distance, once they're older." "It's fascinating work," Marcus admitted, "but challenging. They can never be released." "No," Eleanor agreed, a touch of sadness in her voice. "But they have a home here for life." As Leo and Nala approached their first birthday, The time came to transition them away from Gerda. The bobcat had been a remarkable mother, but the cubs, no longer cubs at all but adolescent lions, needed space to develop their own identities. The separation process was gradual. First, the lions were moved to an adjacent enclosure where they could still see and smell Gerda through a mesh barrier. They spent progressively longer periods apart, though daily supervised interaction sessions continued. "She seems to understand," Tom observed one evening, as Gerda calmly groomed herself after a visit with her now massive adopted children. "She knows they're growing up." Eleanor nodded, though her heart ached watching the family's gradual separation. Mothers always know. It's still hard. By 18 months, Leo and Nala had moved to the sanctuary's main lion habitat, a sprawling 5-acre enclosure designed to mimic their natural environment, complete with elevated platforms, watering holes, and enrichment features. Through the fencing, they could observe the sanctuary's other lions, an elderly male named Samson and 2 middle-aged females, Zara and Luna. "Look at that," Sarah pointed out during one of their regular observation sessions. "They're mirroring Samson's roaring behavior." Indeed, the young lions had begun to display more species-typical behaviors, though certain quirks remained, like Leo's peculiar habit of climbing trees with a bobcat's agility, or Nala's preference for stalking from dense brush rather than open grassland approaches typical of lionesses. "They're creating their own culture," Eleanor mused. "Part lion, part bobcat, entirely themselves." As their second birthday approached, Eleanor and her team prepared for a special event. After extensive consultation with animal behaviorists and careful consideration of all risks, they had decided to allow a supervised reunion between Gerda and her grown foster children. The sanctuary had received a substantial donation to construct a special interaction enclosure for this purpose. Neutral territory for all parties, with multiple escape routes and safety features. The documentary crew had returned to film the reunion, adding a layer of pressure Eleanor could have done without. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked the morning of the planned meeting. "We don't know how they'll react to each other after all this time." Eleanor watched as Leo paced the holding area, his magnificent mane beginning to fill out, his powerful shoulders easily 10 times the size of the bobcat who had raised him. Nala was more composed, but her intensity as she tracked the movement of sanctuary staff revealed her lioness nature. "They've had visual contact regularly," Eleanor reminded her. "And remember last month when Gerda escaped her enclosure during the thunderstorm? She went straight to their habitat fence." It was true. During a violent summer storm, the aging latch on Gerda's enclosure had failed, giving the bobcat an unexpected freedom she could have used to disappear into the surrounding wilderness. Instead, sanctuary security cameras had captured her making a direct line to the lion habitat, where she sat by the fence until morning staff discovered her. "Let's do this," Eleanor decided. The introduction was carefully orchestrated. First, Gerda was allowed into the interaction space alone, giving her time to investigate and mark the area as non-threatening. Then, one at a time, Leo and Nala were permitted to enter through a separate gate. Eleanor, Tom, Sarah, and 2 additional keepers stood at strategic points around the enclosure perimeter, tranquilizer guns reluctantly at the ready. The documentary crew filmed from elevated blinds, their presence minimized. Leo entered first, his powerful frame moving with the casual confidence of youth. He paused just inside the gate, his nose lifted as he caught Gerda's scent. The bobcat, barely visible in the artificial rocky outcropping at the center of the space, remained still. For a heart-stopping moment, Leo lowered his head in a posture that could precede either affection or aggression. Eleanor tightened her grip on the tranquilizer gun. Then, with a rumbling sound that was neither quite a purr nor a growl, Leo approached the rocks. Gerda emerged, her compact form emphasizing just how massive her foster son had become. She showed no fear as the lion lowered his massive head to her level. What happened next brought tears to every watching eye. Leo gently, so gently, rubbed his mane against Gerda's face, a classic feline greeting that acknowledged their connection. The bobcat reached up and licked his muzzle once, a motherly gesture despite the role reversal their sizes now dictated. "My God," Tom whispered. When Nala joined them moments later, the reunion became even more remarkable. The young lioness immediately laid down beside Gerda, rolling to expose her belly in a display of trust typically reserved for Pride members. Gerda moved between her two foster children, exchanging scents and re-establishing their bond. For nearly an hour, the unlikely family reacquainted themselves. They rested together, groomed one another, and even engaged in gentle play that somehow accommodated their vast size differences. Gerda seemed to remember which games had worked when they were cubs, while Leo and Nala appeared to understand their own strength, restraining themselves around their much smaller foster mother. "I never would have believed it," Marcus Reed said softly. He had returned to witness the reunion and stood beside Eleanor at the main observation point. "Their bond has transcended everything: species, separation, time. Family finds a way," Eleanor replied, watching as Leo stretched out protectively beside the bobcat who had saved his life. "It always does." The sanctuary incorporated regular family visits into their animal management plan after the successful reunion. Every few weeks, Gerda would spend supervised time with Leo and Nala in the interaction enclosure. These sessions became popular attractions for sanctuary visitors, though Eleanor insisted on limiting audience sizes to prevent stressing the animals. As fall turned the Arizona landscape golden, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. She sat on the observation deck, watching Leo and Nala lounging in the late afternoon sun on their favorite platform. "Penny for your thoughts," Tom said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "Just thinking about miracles," she replied, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. 2 years ago, those cubs were dying. Now look at them. "Thanks to you," Tom said. Eleanor shook her head. "Thanks to Gerda. She was the real hero." "Speaking of our hero," Tom said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "the board reviewed your proposal this morning." Eleanor straightened, suddenly alert, and approved unanimously. "Construction on the retirement habitat starts next month." A weight lifted from Eleanor's shoulders. The special enclosure would allow Gerda to live out her remaining years in comfort while maintaining regular contact with her unusual family. The bobcat was approaching 10 years old now, senior for her species, especially one who had survived significant trauma. "That's the best news," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "She deserves it." "The documentary premieres next week," Tom reminded her. Early reviews are calling it a game changer for conservation education. The film, titled Unlikely Family, The Bobcat Who Mothered Lions, had evolved from a simple nature documentary into a meditation on adaptation, compassion, and the meaning of family. Advanced screenings had already generated substantial donations for the sanctuary and raised awareness about wildlife trafficking. "I hope it helps people understand," Eleanor said, watching as Leo playfully batted at an enrichment toy. "Animals aren't so different from us. They love, they adapt, they form bonds that defy explanation." Tom followed her gaze to where the 2 young lions now lay side by side, their synchronized breathing highlighting the sibling bond they shared. "The public loves a happy ending. Is it an ending, though?" Eleanor mused. "Or just the beginning of a new chapter?" Indeed, as winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the Arizona highlands, new possibilities emerged. Leo began showing interest in Luna, one of the sanctuary's adult lionesses. Nala had developed a surprising friendship with Samson, the elderly male, often bringing him portions of her enrichment treats. Gerda, meanwhile, had taken an interest in a recently rescued bobcat kitten, orphaned by a forest fire. While direct fostering wasn't possible due to health protocols, the staff had arranged for adjacent enclosures during the kitten's quarantine period. Life finds a way to continue. Eleanor told a group of senior visitors during one of her weekly educational talks. The tour group, residents from a nearby retirement community, watched in awe as Leo demonstrated his impressive roar, now fully developed into the thunderous sound that defined his species. Even in our golden years, she continued with a knowing smile to her contemporaries, we can forge new connections, find new purpose. Gerda taught us that age and difference don't have to be barriers to forming family. Martha Williams, an 82-year-old visitor who had become a regular at these sessions, nodded approvingly. Just like my granddaughter and her adopted children, different as can be, but family all the same. Exactly, Eleanor agreed. The most beautiful families are often the ones we choose. That evening, as the sanctuary quieted and the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, Eleanor made her final rounds. She paused at each enclosure, first checking on the Bobcat kitten, then visiting Gerda in her temporary habitat while her retirement space was being constructed. You changed everything, you know, she told the Bobcat, who blinked slowly at her from a comfortable perch. Not just for those cubs, but for all of us. Her final stop was the lion habitat, where Leo and Nala had settled for the night on their favorite elevated platform. The brother and sister, different in so many ways but united by their unusual upbringing, acknowledged her presence with the calm confidence of cats who knew they were home, knew they were loved. As Eleanor turned to leave, Leo's rumbling purr carried through the evening air, a sound impossible for humans to replicate, but unmistakable in its meaning. Contentment, belonging, peace, good night, family, Eleanor whispered, and made her way back toward the lights of the sanctuary center, her heart full with the knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful bonds are the ones that defy expectation. Behind her, under the vast Arizona sky, the lions settled closer together, their shared history written in every movement, their future, unusual as it might be, secure in the sanctuary that had become their home.